Awesome. Thanks, Mitch. Um, Good evening, everybody. I'm really happy to be able to be here and talk about sort of how GPSL is developing graph-based glossaries and why we think that that's really important. So at GPSL, we work with highly technical organizations in regulated and safety critical industries. So we have two types of clients effectively. One has content that needs to be available at the right time, in the right format for highly configured equipment that has the potential to be in the field for decades. Um, the other type of client that we have is where the content is actually the deliverable. So things like in the regulatory space, maybe how you deal with the gas standards around a barbecue grill, or in the legislative space where you're actually doing bill drafting and amending. So to find out more, take a look at gpsl.co. But let's get into it. So why is corporate vocabulary so important, especially now as we move forward in technology and trying to get not only humans to understand what we're talking about, but also to allow computers to understand what is in the vast treasure troves within a corporation? Basically, within an industry, it has its own language. Even within organizations, they have their own language within that industry. And operating units within a particular organization may also have their own language. So if you've ever walked into a new company or into a new industry, the first 2 days, you tend to be in acronym hell and terminology hell because you don't know what they're talking about. And they're using what are common phrases, but they don't necessarily mean the same things you think that they mean. So words can have multiple meanings all by themselves. Words and phrases will also evolve over time. So what am I talking about? 10 years ago, cloud was one of those white fluffy things that was in the sky. Now that also sort of talks about, digital storage and compute space up in the cloud. So same thing, a virus originally was talked about as sort of a poison or a venom, and then, as a biological pathogen. Now it also means that it's a malicious computer code potentially. And my all-term favorite when trying to talk about how words evolve over time is literally. So the original meaning of literally used to be the building was literally destroyed by the earthquake, meaning it was demolished. Now, literally is usually used for emphasis, and it doesn't necessarily mean that that thing actually happened. You're just trying to emphasize something. So, the other thing that I think is important to stress is that organizational writing is a collective experience. And what does that mean? It means you have a lot of different writers from a lot of different backgrounds that come maybe from different parts of the organization. So multiple voices and multiple inputs that the documents are going to tend to pass through a lot of different hands. They'll pass through a lot of different departments. They're going to contribute their perspectives. The teams are going to collaborate on those documents. Writing tends to be an iterative process. There'll be initial drafts. They'll get reviewed. There'll be some feedback. Documents will evolve through different versions. There'll be some group editing. So, this collective experience, it impacts writing. Common phrases become this internal language for corporations, and it's subtle. They don't even necessarily know it's happening. There'll be different writing styles. You could be doing technical writing, but your background may be as an English major for the great American novel. So, writing tends to be a shared responsibility. Quality is distributed amongst that team and in the organization. I mean, one of my favorite things is that you can either be the author or the editor. You can't be both. There's no quality control there. So you're going to have multiple approvers. You're going to have accountability among that team. But how do you know that you're all playing against the same music? This is that collective nature where it's important to be able to keep everybody on the same page and control your vocabulary. So one of the things I always tell my architects when they're working with a new client is never forget the power of words. The way or the word that you use to understand something is very personal. It's how you associate that content, that concept, in your own network and in your own mind. And a couple other quotes I think that are important. Words are free. It's how you use them that may cost you. So if you're using multiple words to mean the same thing, you're going to have to sort that out at some point. Good words are worth much and cost little. Bad words, or words that don't necessarily mean exactly what you're trying to convey, will start to cost the organizations a lot of money. So what am I talking about? Words, within different industries will mean different things. So for example, chamber in aerospace would be a compartment for combustion and a rocket engine, maybe. In the legislative space, where we also work, the room where a legislature meets. In the oil and gas industry, a chamber is a natural cavity in a rock that might contain oil or gas. And in the medical space, it would be someplace in the body, like a heart chamber. Same thing for the word field. Aerospace, there could potentially be a force, like a magnetic field. In legislative, it might be an area of expertise. In oil and gas, it would be an oil or gas reserve. In medical, it might be a specific area of study or practice. Drift is another good example. So, in aerospace, that would be a gradual deviation from an intended course or position. In legislative, it would be a gradual change in the interpretation or application of a law. In oil and gas, it would be the movement of that oil or gas through a reservoir. And in medical, it would be sort of the gradual change in effectiveness of treatment. Final one, ceiling. In aerospace, that would be sort of the max altitude for an aircraft. In legislative, it would be a limited set of spending or borrowing. In oil and gas, it would be sort of the upper limit for hydrocarbon things that you can do. And medical, it would be sort of the maximum safe dose of something. So never forget the power of words. Word phrases are also incredibly important. Even within, say, the medical industry, if we take those words, and let's just focus in on field for a second, field is not enough to understand exactly what you're talking about. There are words surrounding the word field that are important for that particular understanding or meaning. So, for example, field of view would be the entire area that's visible through some sort of imaging device. It could also mean sterile field, if you were in surgery, or a near field ECG, which would be sort of a measurement taken close to the heart, or a far field ECG, which is further away from the heart. So understanding, words and word phrases and being able to understand the specific meanings that they have in the context of the work that the organization is doing is incredibly critical. So, organizations that proactively control their corporate glossaries give the readers a number of advantages. One is sort of clarity and precision in communication. A well-maintained corporate glossary ensures that readers, not only within the organization, but clients and partners, have a shared understanding of that terminology and reduces misunderstandings. A consistency across documents and departments. By standardizing terminology, the readers are encountering a consistent language for the various corporate documents that they may encounter: reports, flight operations information, maintenance information. There's better cross-functional collaboration. People from different departments sort of understand each other without that dizzying array of acronyms and terminology that they may not be using on a daily basis. It's reducing, your likelihood of risk, especially in precision critical fields like legal and medical and engineering. There's a context aware understanding that when you're implementing something like with Neo4j as a graph database, readers can gain an incredible amount of insight just from the words that you find important enough to put in your glossary, and hopefully that will show through in the demo that I'm going to do. And finally, it's a preservation of corporate knowledge. You have this writing experience across all of these different writers. Some people are going to leave, some people are going to retire, and the way they wrote and the terms that were used are going to continue to be important for an organization's sort of accumulated knowledge, that stays on and is still important, as the people change. So we've been using a new hashtag at GPSL that we kind of like, which is sort of banish uncertainty and ambiguity and deliver clarity and consistency every day, everywhere, hashtag writing for reading. So that's really what we're focused on when it comes to the vocabulary, is making it so that the terminology is consistent, it's understandable, or that it can become understandable depending on who your reader and your audience is. So what are some of the challenges of maintaining a traditional glossary? Um, you know, Updating and versioning, you'll hear, oh, we have it in an Excel spreadsheet. How many people have the Excel spreadsheet open when they're writing a document? Probably not many. How do you know that you have the latest version of that document and that it has all the terms that are across all the documentation sets in different departments? Same thing, cross-referencing. In a traditional format, it tends to be really hard to navigate the relationships between terms, bigram terms, and where does that appear in the documents? Because context means a lot for things. So contextual variations, they struggle to capture a term's meaning, and how it might change in different contexts in the department or in the different products where it's being used. Same thing from a scalability perspective. The traditional glossary has a problem scaling. It tends to get large and it gets hard to use. It's harder to break down into sort of effectively its essential components or categories for just the pieces that you need. And then access and distribution. What are you going to do if it's an Excel spreadsheet? Are you going to email it around all the time? You're going to put it up on a SharePoint and hope that people use it. There's got to be sort of a better way. The two other things that are worth pointing out is sort of the inflexibility, where traditional formats, are hard to reorganize and repurpose and reuse. So if it's one of the facets that you have in your graph database amongst many, you can gain a lot of insight from that. And again, hopefully that will sort of show through here in the demo. And then integration difficulties. You may be able to bring up a word and a definition using the traditional meaning so that you have sort of a lookup for this. But again, it's not necessarily integrated with your content. It's not necessarily integrated with the other concepts that are important to the organization. So it tends to be isolated in an island. If you hear these kinds of things within an organization, like, is this definition current? I understand it differently. Or, where else is this term used? What other document is this used in? Is it only used once? Or, does this term mean the same thing? We in our department, we use these two terms interchangeably. And, I know that term as this, and this is how I write my documents. So those are the types of things that are warning signs for us when we're working with clients that we potentially have a vocabulary problem. So how does a graph database help this? Basically, graph databases are fantastic at providing natural representations of relationships using nodes and edges. The schemas are flexible. We're going to see some of that in the demo, where I add something on to some of the text nodes that I have. They're insanely efficient at being able to query. And again, I'll show in the demo us being able to look at sort of all the glossary terms that we've defined and the potential glossary terms that we might want to be able to add. And then the enhanced navigation, which you see a lot in a lot of the demos, I'm sure that you've seen in the past, where you open up one node to be able to start exploring, and then you're able to sort of navigate from there, makes it so that it's really powerful. You can see everything that's surrounding that. A node knows all of its relationships. And then, finally, just from a semantic context perspective, it tends to be really important. So, if I use the word or the sentence, the bank is closed, right? Well, without context, we don't know if we're referring to a financial institution or the edge of a river. So, semantic context is important, and graphs tend to be really good at being able to help cover where words and phrases appear and its situational context, knowing sort of what is known between the communicators. And then finally, the domain context, the subject matter of the field, the technical terminology. So how do we create a database for our graph database for corporate glossaries? We can do that by extracting all of the words and word phrases from the corporate documents that we're interested in. Tonight in the demo, I'm going to use 2 documents, but you could potentially have hundreds or thousands. So you're going to extract all of the words and word phrases to identify important terms and concepts within the organization. So in this example, in document A on page 5, paragraph 2, I have text. And then if I extract all of the keywords from this, I have flight and crew and report and outcome, verification, and initiated. But then I also have important word phrases that I need to take in account too as well. Flight isn't enough. So I have flight crew. I have verification flight. So what we're going to do is we're going to extract all the keywords and word phrases from a particular set of documents. Just sort of one more note about this. We're doing this for keywords and word phrases. You can use lots of different techniques to get additional information as well, like named entity recognition. So I could be going after organizations. I could be going after products, dates that I'm finding in the documents. There's lots of other facets, like I said, that you could be going after besides terminology. But in relation to the glossary, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to convert the rows that I have of information from these documents into nodes and relationships. So for document A, I'm going to create a node that's document A. And then for the location, I'm going to add that as a property on a text node. I'm going to add the text to the text node as well and create a relationship that says this document has this particular text. And then for each of the keywords, and each of the word phrases, I'm going to create a node that's a term. And I'm going to associate that term where it's going to be related to that text. And finally, assuming that I have built up my glossary already, what I'm going to do is I'm going to identify the terms that I have within the graph database and determine which ones belong in my corporate glossary and what their meaning is. So we've come to that point where we're going to do a quick demo to try and show some of these concepts. I've chosen an aviation term, ETOPS, for this demo. And basically, there's 2 different types of documents that we're going to use. So for people that are not in the industry, ETOPS stands for an extended twin range operation approval. It allows twin engine airplanes to operate on routes that contain a point that's further than 1 hour of flying on one engine working or one engine being inoperative. A lot of us use a different term for ETOPS, which is engines turn or passenger swim. So what we're interested in doing is we're going to extract out of the requirements for ETOPS all of the key terms that we find in the paragraphs for that document. And then what I want to be able to do is I want to be able to check my aircraft maintenance manual to determine what ETOPS requirements it might have in it and compare that against what is effectively the requirements document. So to start out, I am going to just sort of show you the schema that we're using within Neo4j here. So I have document, which we've seen in the table in the example. Documents can contain text or has text. They also have terms, which may be individual words or maybe word phrases. And terms may be in our glossary. I also have these concepts here that I wanted to just show with product, organizations, and dates. So while I'm extracting terms from my text, I could also potentially be extracting things like weekly, monthly, or organizations, flight operations, corporate, or products, Airbus A320 or Boeing 737. So these are the relationships that we sort of have within the um, within the database. So let's start with basically just a simple Cipher query. And what we're going to do is we're going to match all the terms that have glossary entries that are currently in one of the two documents that we have in the database. Okay. Already we're getting some interesting information here. So out of the first document, which is the aircraft maintenance manual, there's lots of terms that it has that have glossary entries and what their definitions are. And out of the ETOPS document, we have lots of terms that have glossary entries. And we see between the two documents that we've got a lot of terms that have glossary entries and that are in common. So just in a simple query, we've already learned some interesting information that these are the areas that we can focus on that both documents effectively are communicating and talking about. The other thing that you can find out from these is that if you see lots of islands of terms and glossary entries that don't really have any meaningful text associated with them, why do you have them in your glossary? Why are they important to you? So I'm going to switch tabs here briefly. I have an application that's connected to my graph database. And what the application is doing is it's allowing me to sift through all of my potential terms and the text that's associated or was extracted from that term. So I get all of my text paragraphs next to the words that I might want to be able to put in my glossary. So I can go look for things that I might want to be able to add. So let's, for example, talk about abnormality, right? So I could add abnormality to my graph database. It's a noun. So again, this is me being able to categorize at a lower level things that are in my glossary. It's a technical noun. I had an AI program that just basically gave me at least the start of a definition, but I could modify the definition to be what I need. And then I can also sort of categorize why this was added to the glossary. So in this case, it would be a technical noun that has to do with damage terms, for example. And I can save that to my glossary. And now that's in the graph database. It's been removed from the potential list, and it's been added to my existing glossary. And this is exactly the same glossary that we're seeing within the Neo4j workspace here. So let's take this a step further. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to match all terms that are in the glossary that are also in both of the documents. So in the ETOPS requirements document and the aircraft maintenance manual. Helps if I take out the comment. Okay, so we have a much smaller list. Now, I didn't ask it to display the glossary entries at this point. What I asked was, what are all of the terms that both of these documents have in common? So these make sense for an extended time over water as far as things that you would need to be worried about. So wings, the airplane, the cockpit, the engines. Okay, so shop, that might be interesting. So if I expand shop, I now see that I've got a glossary entry for shop, so a place where products are manufactured. And then I have 3 text fragments that are also associated with that particular term. So this chapter describes how to replace components, refer to the manufacturers, manual and for shop data. And so that's coming out of the aircraft maintenance manual. This is coming out of the requirements document. It says for engines, total cycle time or total cycles and time since last shop visit. Okay. So I'm able to take a look at what I have in the requirements document, as well as what I have within the aircraft maintenance manuals. Now, if you remember, I said that there's a real flexibility to the schemas that you can use within a graph database, especially in something like Neo4j. I've added to the text fragments a property that specifies whether this text fragment is a requirement or not. And the way I'm determining if it's a requirement is pretty basic. I'm basically looking for words like must, shall, will. But what I would be interested in is what terms are in both of the documents that are in the glossary that have text that's a requirement associated with it. And so I get a fairly big bloom. And the first term would be engine. Makes sense based on the documents that we're looking at. And that would be a pretty important term to have defined, where we do have it in the glossary. And then we also have aircraft, which would also be an important term for something in the lines of what we're looking at. So, hopefully this is giving you sort of a sense of how having this ability to interact with your corporate glossaries, determine what words you're using, compare them against each of the different types of documents that you have, is a really powerful way of being able to look at things. So in summary, first, thank you very much for the opportunity to speak at Nodes. And we work with organizations that are all along this adoption curve. Some are at the start, and some are actually fairly sophisticated. What we realized is that they all have valuable content that they can't necessarily repurpose for things like they want to be able to do with like GraphRag. If you walk into an organization and don't understand the 3-letter acronyms and the 4-letter acronyms and the terms that are being used, why do you think an AI is going to do any better? So working on the corporate glossary is one of those first steps that pays a lot of dividends throughout the organization, as well as within the organization's customer base. With that, I thank you. Let's see if we've got any questions.